Oh, that's more for the research, right? That's not a regulator.
Okay. So in terms of what a regulator would look like, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is evolving towards an integrated, perhaps independent regulator that brings together all aspects of the regulatory process. Right now, we're living in a series of silos with different departments that have responsibility for different parts of the EIA process and so forth. And so the idea is to bring that together into an integrated body for a number of reasons. One of which is that first, you can't isolate one resource development like shale gas from the broader resource development agenda. Second, there are cumulative impacts over time, and you need to have an ongoing environmental monitoring and mapping regime, the kind of stuff that we talked about here before. And so folks, not only here, but everywhere, are moving towards this more integrated approach. And so we get into a little bit of detail on what that could look like.
And secondly, you talk how the government does have some time now with the state of the industry, commodity prices, and whatnot. Knowing what you recommended, how long do you believe it will take to implement these things in order to, I guess, reach a satisfactory level if government decides to go forward?
Sure.
We have to remind everybody constantly, these are findings, right?
And so in the language of findings, and a number of our findings and about strengthening the environmental infrastructure in the province, which by the way is not just in Brunswick, it's a work in progress and we're all evolving towards new standards. Some of that, quite frankly, is quite independent of what the province decides to do with respect to shale gas, right? We have time to build an effective system. We must. It's not about time. This ultimately is not driven by time. It's driven by the needs of our community to have state-of-the-art, effective regulatory, research, monitoring regimes in place. And then we make a contribution to how that infrastructure should be built.
How much time does that take, though?
It's going to be a work in progress. I guess the answer is forever, because standards keep changing, the requirements keep changing. There are things that can be implemented fairly quickly, and there are things that will take some time.
Another aspect, if I could just add to that we envisioned for this regulator, should it be established, is the important role that the regulator would play in working with communities. Because we want this to be a community-centric or community-focused approach rather than a project-specific approach. So the regulator could be convening community groups, business groups together, indigenous people, government together at the same table to seek input, to hear their views, to get their ideas, and together decide whether or not this looks like it should happen this way. So they're playing quite a big role in educating the public on the scientific findings and so on.
So Jacques and then Charles.
I have two questions. The first is,
Excuse me.
you're really recommending a sweeping overhaul of how governments consult people on resource development or industry in general. And I'm wondering, given how slow the pace of change is generally in the province, whether that is really realistic.
We did recommend a whole of government approach to developing a better, more effective model for working with its citizens. I guess you just have to look around to see that current and older models haven't brought always the kinds of outcomes that we desired. So yes, we are, I would say you're right in your perception there, or your insight on that. The new model would require the government creating the space, making sure it happens, doing its best to make this happen. But here comes the regulator again. The regulator could be the mechanism for bringing people together to sit down and talk about these things. I think we can no longer run away or avoid talking about our sources of energy. That's what we're mandated to look at here in this commission, is hydraulic fracturing. So what role, if any, is natural gas going to play in our energy mix in New Brunswick, in the larger context of signing on to CAP 21 commitments, global commitments? It needs discussion, and the people we talk to, Jacques, want to be at the table. They're very eager to be at the table, realizing that in the end, the government has to make a decision, but they want to be there, and we're hopeful that that could happen.
And can you elaborate on your observation about the problem created by departments now that both promote and regulate particular industries? Just a couple of months ago, we saw the Minister of Environment talk about the EIA for a mine that was needed so that the jobs could be created. Is that an example? Can you elaborate on that phenomenon?
Well, a good example would be the increasing importance of health impacts. And as you know, we met with Dr. Curie and her senior staff, and got a deep appreciation of how that has to be brought into the regulatory process in greater depth. Another example is that we tend, and this is not a fault just of New Brunswick, but we tend to be project specific, right?
But I'm referring specifically to the idea that a department is both promoting and regulating the same industry.
Yeah. So I'll get to that, but the first problem is if it's project specific and then you're dealing with cumulative impacts and long-term concerns, then the regulatory regime doesn't capture that. More generally, should you be putting the economic agenda and the environmental agenda together and forcing them to compete is a real concern. And how do we elevate the importance of the environment to the overall discourse, to the conversation about the future of New Brunswick? And how do we put that front and center on the table? It is part of this conversation we've been having.
Charles?
I'm just curious, just two questions. How much does every member on the panel, how much they were paid to do this, and how much this study costs to do this?
Let me take a stab at it. I'm a volunteer. I have put hundreds of hours into this exercise. In terms of cost, there was a budget. By the way, the budget is handled by the government, Charles, so you can go and have a look at. I don't know the exact details because they manage the budget. My cost in the energy department, so it's there. It's public information. I did, and I'm an example of the commissioner. So my time was a volunteer. We did one trip to Pennsylvania, so there was a travel cost. We've had several meetings around the province to meet with stakeholder groups. So, but I didn't drive most of the time. Somebody else, so they had a travel plan. Point is, and then we had a small support staff in a secretariat, and those were government employees. So, you know, it's a low rent operation, but I got to tell you, we put a lot of time into this, Charles. We may be volunteers, but we put hundreds of hours into this.
So, Charles, would you have to say?
Charles, did you have another question?
No, just the bottom line, the final cost of this whole study is I have to talk to the minister, Donald Asano, Roger Manos. Yeah, okay.
Charles, this is it, so presumably whatever cost you get there, that's it. We're done. We're done.
Vous dites dans votre rapport qu'avant même de discuter de gaz de schiste,